Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today we've got a very special one for you. We're collaborating with Mike and the guys over at List25. List25 is a channel that I followed for a long time before I had a decent-sized YouTube channel, and so for me it's a particularly cool experience to get to collaborate with them in this video. The way we're doing it is we're sharing presenting duties, so I will take the evens, Mike, the host over on List25, will take the odds. There's going to be 25 of them. We figured List25 are guests on our channel, so we'd love to do, host something in their style. So that's what we're doing. I'd really love it if you guys went over and checked out the video that we did on, Mike and I did for List25's channel. I will link to that on the screen now, as well as below this video. Also, just go and subscribe to List25. They put out great stuff on a super regular schedule, just like this channel, and I think if you like us, you probably like them. All right, let's get going, and first, over to Mike.
Death by golden shower was once used as a method of execution. Execution by golden shower was once used by the Pathans, aka Pashtuns. British soldier John Masters, who was stationed in British India when he was 18 in 1933, described this and other methods of execution for captured soldiers in the region. If they, Pathans, captured any soldiers, especially if the soldiers were Sikhs or British, they would usually castrate and behead them. Both these operations were frequently done by the women. Sometimes they would torture prisoners with the death of 1,000 cuts, pushing grass and thorns into each wound as it was made. Sometimes they would peg the prisoner out and, with a stick, force his jaws so wide open that he could not swallow, and then the women would urinate in his open mouth, taking turns, till he drowned.
7-Up originally contained psychiatric medication. The lemon-lime flavored soda, 7-Up, was created by Charles Grigg of the Howdy Corporation in 1929, originally labeled Bib Label Lithiated Lemon-Lime Soda, and included lithium citrate in its formula. This is a mood-stabilizing drug that was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and is still occasionally used today for people with conditions like bipolar disorder. Surprisingly, lithium citrate stuck around in 7-Up all the way until 1950, when research showed it had potentially dangerous side effects.
Play-Doh was originally wallpaper cleaner. In 1933, a young Cleo McVicker was at a meeting with Kroger grocery store executives when they asked if his company, Kootal, made wallpaper cleaner. With Kootal desperately needing money, Cleo told them they did. A bold lie. Kroger subsequently ordered 15,000 cases of the product, with a $5,000 penalty if Kootal didn't deliver on time. Kootal then copied a commonly used wallpaper cleaner recipe, and the compound that ultimately would become Play-Doh was born. As coal heat began to go the way of the dodo and vinyl wallpaper was invented, few needed wallpaper cleaner anymore, and the McVicker's product was virtually obsolete. That's when Kay Zufall, the sister-in-law of one of the executives at Kootal, came up with the idea of using the substance as a toy modeling compound. The result was that Kootal removed the detergent from the dough and added an almond scent and some coloring. They rechristened the compound Kootal's Rainbow Modeling Compound, which was soon changed to Play-Doh at the suggestion of Kay. With a little help from Bob Keeshan, better known as Captain Kangaroo, who was promised 2% of the sales generated if he promoted it on his show, Play-Doh quickly became a national hit.
Bubble wrap was originally wallpaper. Bubble wrap was invented by two engineers, Al Fielding and Mark Havenay, in Hawthorne, New Jersey in 1957. The two were not, however, trying to make a product to be used as packaging material. Rather, they were trying to create a textured wallpaper. When this use of the product didn't pan out, they decided to market it as greenhouse insulation. This idea didn't sell well either. Then, on October 5th, 1959, IBM announced their new 1401 variable word length computer, and a light bulb went off. Bubble wrap could be used as a good packaging material to protect the computer while it was being shipped. The pair pitched the idea to IBM, who loved it, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Einstein got his wife to agree to divorce him by promising his Nobel Prize funds to her if he ever won one. In 1919, Einstein was looking to finally divorce his wife, who had thus far resisted the idea, despite that they had long been separated. To convince her, he wrote her a letter stating, "Dear Mileva, the endeavor finally to put my private affairs in some state of order prompts me to suggest the divorce to you for the second time. I would grant you significant pecuniary advantages through particularly generous concessions. 1. 9,000 marks instead of 6,000 marks, with the provision that 2,000 of it be deposited annually for the benefit of the children. 2. The Nobel Prize, in the event of the divorce and in the event that it is bestowed upon me, would be ceded to you in full. 3. The widow's pension would be promised to you in the case of a divorce. Naturally, I would make such huge sacrifices only in the case of a voluntary divorce. If you do not consent to the divorce, from now on, not a cent, about 6,000 marks per year, will be sent to Switzerland. Despite that he'd not yet won a Nobel Prize for her to collect the large cash prize, after thinking it over for a week, she accepted.
There was once a man who ate an entire airplane. The eating disorder, known as pica, is characterized by persistent and compulsive cravings to eat non-food items. Some people have turned their appetite for these non-digestible foods into a career. Perhaps one of the most notable individuals on this front is Michel Lotito, aka Monsieur Mange Tout, Mr. Eats All, who specialized in eating metal. If that doesn't sound too impressive, perhaps we should mention that from 1959 to 1997, Michel consumed nearly 9 tons of metal, including 18 bicycles, 15 shopping carts, 7 television sets, 6 chandeliers, 2 bed frames, and an entire Cessna airplane, which took him almost 2 years. He also consumed a coffin and 400 meters of a steel chain.
Sleeping Beauty is based on a story of a king who raped a sleeping girl. The story is called The Sun, the Moon, and Talia, written, or at least collected and composed, by the Italian poet Giambattista Basile in 1634. The story goes that on a hunting trip, a king stumbles on an estate in the woods where he finds a beautiful young woman that he can't wake up. So, to quote, "Being on fire with love, he carried her to a couch, and having gathered the fruits of love, left her lying there. Then he returned to his own kingdom, and for a long time entirely forgot the affair." Ultimately, the sleeping girl, cared for by fairies, gave birth to twins, then later woke up. It's at this point the king remembered the girl and decided to go back to the house to see her again. This time, though, he found her awake. After the king explained to her how she'd gotten pregnant, naturally, she fell in love with him. He was no doubt dreamy, and he decided he loved her too. The only problem? He was already married. When the queen found out about the affair, she attempts to have the babies fed to the king unknowingly, and then tries to kill Talia. Instead, the chef hides the kids, and the king kills his wife and marries his raped mistress, and they live happily ever after, with the last line of the story being, translated, "Lucky people, so 'tis said, are blessed by fortune whilst in bed."
There was once a girl who had no vagina but got stabbed and had a baby. Published in the British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology in 1988, there is a rather curious paper entitled Oral Conception, Impregnation via the Proximal Gastrointestinal Tract in a Patient with Aplastic Distal Vagina, case report. In it, the doctors describe a 15-year-old girl in the small African country of Lesotho who arrived at a local hospital with all the signs of a woman in labor. Upon examination, the doctors found no vagina, only a shallow skin dimple. After a successful C-section resulted in a healthy baby boy, the doctors noted, while closing the abdominal wall, curiosity could not be contained any longer, and the patient was interviewed with the help of a sympathetic nursing sister. The patient was well aware of the fact that she had no vagina and had started oral experiments after disappointing attempts at conventional intercourse. Just before she was stabbed in the abdomen, some 278 days previous to giving birth, she had practiced fellatio with her new boyfriend and was caught in the act by a former lover. The fight with knives ensued. The physicians later learned that while doing the surgery to repair the stab wounds, the surgeons had found 2 holes that opened the girl's stomach to her abdominal cavity. Thus, it is theorized by doctors in the report that the sperm in the girl's stomach gained access to her reproductive organs through her injured gastrointestinal tract shortly after she ingested it. Interestingly, getting pregnant as the result of sperm originating in a woman's abdomen is possible enough that in the 1980s, during the early days of fertility treatments, doctors sometimes performed a procedure called DIPI, direct intraperitoneal insemination, during which they injected sperm into the lower abdomen, hoping that it would find its way to an egg, similar to what happened in the case report, except obviously not going through the stomach.
There was once a guy who survived 2 nuclear explosions. At the age of 29, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was on his way back home from a 3-month-long business trip to Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. On his way to the train station, he saw a bomber flying over the city and 2 small parachutes. Then a rush of blinding light, sound, wind, and heat knocked him to the ground. Mr. Yamaguchi had the misfortune of being approximately 3 kilometers from a nuclear blast. The immediate effects of this were his eardrums rupturing, temporary blindness, and burns over much of his upper body. 3 days later, he found himself back at home in Nagasaki, and even reported for work. According to Yamaguchi, while discussing with his boss how he got the burns, the air raid sirens went off, and then, once again, he saw a blinding white light. Surprisingly, unlike so many others, the only major permanent physical health problems Yamaguchi had as a result of the bombings and the exposure to large amounts of ionizing radiation was the loss of hearing in his left ear. He lived to the ripe old age of 93, dying of stomach cancer on January 4th, 2010.
The founder of FEDEX once gambled the company's last funds in Las Vegas to save it. The man is Frederick W. Smith, who founded FEDEX in 1971. The company struggled in its early days, and at its low point, all they had was about $5,000 left in the bank. Desperate, Smith made a final pitch for more funding but was refused, leaving FEDEX more or less dead on the ground when they would not be able to fuel their planes the following Monday. Instead of accepting defeat, Smith flew to Las Vegas for the weekend and played blackjack with the remaining company funds. Thanks to this, by Monday, FEDEX had $32,000 in its bank account, which was just enough to cover the cost of fuel for their planes and to continue operating for a few days more. When asked what he'd been thinking taking a chance like that with company funds, he stated, "What difference does it make? Without the funds for the fuel companies, we couldn't have flown anyway." It turns out that a few days more was all he needed. Shortly thereafter, Smith successfully managed to raise $11 million to keep the company afloat, and by 1976, Federal Express made its first profit of $3.6 million. Today, the company employs over 300,000 people and has an annual revenue of about $47 billion.
Daylight savings time once thwarted a terrorist attack. In September of 1999, the West Bank was on daylight savings time, while Israel was on standard time. West Bank terrorists prepared bombs set on timers and smuggled them to their associates in Israel. As a result, the bombs exploded 1 hour sooner than the terrorists in Israel thought they would. Thus, the 3 terrorists died instead of the 2 busloads of people who were the intended targets.
The can opener wasn't invented for decades after the can. In 1810, Nicholas Appert won a prize offered by Napoleon Bonaparte for his method of keeping food fresh by sterilization. Although he didn't understand exactly why it worked, Appert found that food stayed fresh for long periods of time if you could seal it tightly in a container, in his case a glass jar, and then heat it up. Later that year, an inventor, Peter Durand, received a patent for the world's first can made of iron and tin. Combined with Appert's sterilization method, long-term canned food preservation became possible. Unfortunately, there was no can opener forthcoming, owing to how thick the can and lids were. The age-old smash it with a hammer and knife technique was the common opening method. Ultimately, a method for making thinner cans was created, resulting in various can openers being invented, the first patented in 1858, nearly half a century after the can was invented.
The guy who invented the Fender guitar never learned to play guitar. Leo Fender, inventor of one of the most popular electric guitar brands in the world, was an accountant before losing his job in the Great Depression. When this happened, he decided to turn his hobby of tinkering with electronics into a business, Fender Radio and Record Shop, where he ultimately invented various amplifiers and later guitars. Despite designing the first commercially successful solid-body electric guitar, the Telecaster, and the most influential of all electric guitars, the Stratocaster, and inventing the solid-body electric bass guitar, the Precision Bass, Leo Fender never learned to play guitar.
Picasso's full name can't be posted on Twitter. Pablo Picasso's full name was, and I'm gonna take a crack at this, please don't give me too much grief in the comments, Pablo Diego Jose Francisco de Pablo Juan Nemoputzmeno Maria de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santissima Trinidad Reyes y Picasso. You have no idea how many takes it took me to get that half right.
High heels were once the height of men's fashion. The first high heel wearers are believed to have been Persian horseback warriors, sometime around the 9th century. The extended heel is thought to have been developed specifically for riding, to keep the rider's foot from slipping out of the stirrups. After a group of Persian diplomats visited Europe in the late 16th century, Persian-style high-heeled shoes were adopted by Western European aristocrats. The shoes became a status symbol, with ornate designs and ultra-high heels coming into fashion, such as the case of King Louis XIV sporting 4-inch heels, often decorated with elaborate battle scenes. Not to be outdone, women of the 1600s started copying the fashion. Around the same time, lower class citizens also started wearing high heels, resulting in the elite making their heels increasingly higher. They also began to differentiate heels into two kinds: fat heels for men and skinny for women. By the 18th century, high heels disappeared almost completely from men's fashion, outside of cowboy boots, and not long after, women mostly stopped wearing them too. However, the heel came back into fashion for women in the mid-19th century with the advent of photography. Why? Pornographers began dressing models for risque postcards and other photographs in little else but high heels.
Green eggs and ham was the product of a bet. Dr. Seuss, aka Theodore Geisel, wrote Green Eggs and Ham on a bet that he couldn't write a book with 50 or fewer distinct words. The bet was made in 1960 with Bennett Cerf, the co-founder of Random House, and was for $50, about $404 today. Green Eggs and Ham went on to become the fourth best-selling English children's book in history.
Al Capone's brother was a prohibition officer. Al Capone's brother, James Vincenzo Capone, left the family at the age of 16 to join the circus in 1908, traveling throughout the Midwest, going by the name Richard Hart, in order to mask his Italian heritage. He ultimately settled in Homer, Nebraska, where he became Homer's town marshal and later a state sheriff. It was then that he chose to seek out more excitement by becoming a prohibition enforcement officer, something he was extremely effective at, though known to be overly brutal in handling bootleggers. Around this same time, his brother Al was rising in fame as a gangster in Chicago, particularly known for, of course, bootlegging.
There was once a Siberian family who didn't encounter other humans for over 40 years. Karplikov was a member of a long-persecuted fundamentalist Russian Orthodox sect known as the Old Believers. In 1936, while working the fields with his brother near their village, a communist guard came by and shot his brother right in front of him. Karp immediately grabbed his family, which at the time only consisted of his wife, Akulina, his son Savin, and their 2-year-old daughter, Natalia, and disappeared into the Siberian wilderness. It would be another 42 years before the family would encounter other humans again. A team of geologists spotted their hut when flying over in a helicopter. Karp and his wife, who would die of starvation in 1961 thanks to a cold snap that killed all their crops the summer before, had 2 more children in the wild, Dmitry and Agathia. For reference, Agathia was 35 when she first saw humans outside of her family. None of the family knew anything of the outside world from 1936 to 1978. By 1988, Agathia was the only surviving member of the family. She remained at her remote home until January of 2016, when she had to be airlifted to a hospital due to severe pain in her leg. After healing up, however, she returned to the harsh Siberian wilderness.
There is an ATM in Antarctica. There's an ATM at McMurdo Station in Antarctica, about 840 miles or 1,351 kilometers from the South Pole. Not surprisingly, this ATM is the most southern ATM in the world. The most northern ATM in the world is in Longyearbyen, Svalbard, Norway, which is about halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. The world's highest ATM is at Kondrab Pass, 15,397 feet or 4.7 kilometers above sea level. Finally, the world's lowest ATM is in Ain Bokek, near the Dead Sea, in a grocery store that's 1,381 feet or 420 meters below sea level.
The first woman to cast a vote in Chicago did so with her feet. The woman was Kitty Smith. Smith lost her arms as a child after having both her arms and hands burned badly on a kitchen stove. As an adult, Kitty eventually became the first woman to vote in Chicago, Illinois in 1913. Hold on there, you say, because the 19th Amendment wasn't passed until 1920. How was she able to vote in 1913? In Illinois, on June 26, 1913, women began being allowed to vote on presidential and many other elections. Shortly thereafter, an estimated 250,000 women, with Kitty Smith's feet leading the way, voted in Chicago, Illinois, when the first Illinois election took place after that bill passed.
Charles Osborne had the hiccups for 68 straight years. In 1922, Charles Osborne was weighing a hog for slaughter when he had a little accident. As he stated, "I was hanging a 350-pound hog for butchering. I picked it up and then I fell down. I felt nothing, but the doctor said later that I busted a blood vessel the size of a pin in." Directly after the fall, Osborne began hiccuping at a rate of around 40 times per minute, on average. Throughout his life, this gradually slowed to about 20 hiccups per minute, until his hiccups finally stopped mysteriously about 1 year before his death in 1991. This approximate 68-year stretch of hiccups from 1922 to 1990 is considered a world record for continuous hiccups. That is not a world record I'd want to break. You can have it, Charles. It's all yours. Damn it.
KFC is the traditional Christmas dinner in Japan. In 1974, KFC started a huge advertising campaign in Japan called, and again butchering the pronunciation, but Kurasumasu ni wa Kentakai, which means Kentucky for Christmas. The idea was that in a land bereft of the customary turkey for celebratory dinner, fried chicken was the next best thing. This campaign was ludicrously popular, in part thanks to the popularity of American culture in Japan at the time. Today, the custom of eating KFC for Christmas is so popular in Japan that you'll not only see lines of people snaked outside every branch in the country, but people even reserve their buckets weeks and sometimes months in advance just to see it on their dinner tables at Christmas.
In 1899, 90% of all taxis in New York City were electric cars. In 1842, two inventors, American Thomas Davenport and a Scotsman Robert Davidson, separately created the first practical electric cars with rechargeable batteries. By 1899, the technology had improved such that 90% of all taxis in New York City were electric cars. Not only that, but in 1899 and 1900, electric cars outsold all other types of cars, such as gas and steam-powered vehicles. Ultimately, Henry Ford and the rise of highways killed the electric car industry. Nonetheless, Ford's wife, Clara, preferred the 1914 Detroit electric car, which had a range of 80 miles over her husband's cars.
There was once a man who was a dwarf and later a giant. Adam Rainer of Graz, Austria, reached a height of just 4 feet 6.3 inches, that's 1.38 meters, by the age of 18. For reference, the cutoff for someone being classified as a dwarf is usually considered to be an adult height of less than 4 feet 10 inches, that's 1.47 meters. According to Rainer, by the time he hit 21, while still barely classified as a dwarf in height, his shoe size had shot up to a European size 53, which would be about a size 20 in the United States. For reference, Shaquille O'Neal wears a size in the US of 22 to 23. Then his body followed. From his 21st birthday to his 32nd, Rainer went from just under 4 feet 10 inches tall to 7 feet 2 inches tall. That's 1.47 meters to 2.18 meters. As to what caused his bizarre growth spurt as an adult, doctors F. Windholz and A. Mandel discovered a tumor on his pituitary gland, which resulted in a condition known as acromegaly, where the pituitary gland produces excessive amounts of growth hormones during adulthood. To try to fix the problem, in 1930, doctors removed the tumor, but he still continued to grow, albeit at a much slower rate. He died at the age of 51 in 1950 at a height of about 7 feet and 8 inches, that's 2.34 meters, making him the only known person to spend time as an adult officially classified as a dwarf, and then later a giant.
The inventor of the Pringles can was buried in one. Upon his death in 2008, just 20 days shy of his 90th birthday, the inventor of the Pringles can, Frederick J. Bauer, was cremated. In keeping with his wishes, his family filled a Pringles can with as much of his ashes as fit and buried it. As to what flavor, his son Larry stated, "My siblings and I briefly debated what flavor to use, but I said, look, we need to use the original."
So I really hope you enjoyed that video. As I mentioned at the top, it was a real pleasure to get to collaborate on this video with Mike and the guys from List25. I'd really recommend, as I said at the top, if you go over and watch the video that Mike and I did on their channel. It's another one similar to this, a little bit shorter, but I'll put a link to it right up here. Also, when you're over at List25, remember to subscribe to their channel. They put out lots of great content, just like the video we worked on. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and thank you for watching.